With a new city council, we must admit there is a new level of expectation for the city. We don't run away from high expectations. In fact, we draw energy from them.
Well, that's Mayor Bruce Harrell talking about what's expected from him and the Seattle City Council in his State of the City address this week. What indicators about policy can we draw from this speech, if any? And also, what's next for Council President Sarah Nelson as she steps into her role with a majority of support from her peers? Plus, what's in the state's new budget proposal, especially when it comes to transportation? And also, what changes can we expect to see in our region's homelessness crisis? Well, all this and more this week on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are mine, and I am with my co-host David Croman, City Hall reporter for the Seattle Times. So here we are, David, a week into spring training. Is it too early to say that I'm definitely seeing the Seattle Mariners get to the World Series, or should I have just said that in January?
If you're ever going to say that, this is the time. I mean, you're being unfair to yourself if you're not hopelessly optimistic at this time of year. There's plenty of time for pessimism later.
Indeed. That's the right way to look at it, David. Thank you, as always, for joining me. Thanks also to our background noise sponsor, City Grind Espresso, on the first floor of City Hall. Thanks also to our show patrons. Linda, thank you so much for sticking with us as a patron. Thanks for your always helpful comments and questions. And listeners, if you can pledge just $5 a month to the show, we work with you to answer questions about City Hall. Plus, you can access Patrons First podcast before anybody else. Watch for one of those later this week. We really appreciate the support. Come with us, patrons. We need you. Also, a big thanks to Converge Media. The video version of the podcast is on Converge. You can watch it Wednesday nights at 7. All right, let's get going with Right Here, Right Now. David, I wanted to get your perspective on what the mayor said in his State of the City address this week, and I thought it would be helpful to break this into two parts, what he said and then what he didn't say. You had a good write-up on this in the Seattle Times, and I wanted to start with what he did say, some of the highlights there. He was talking about reviewing recruitment policies at the Seattle Police Department. Public safety concerns, of course, a big part of last year's election. He also talked about an impending announcement for funding a post-overdose center. Help guide us through some of these public safety points maybe and any other high-level issues that jumped out at you in terms of what he did say in this speech.
You know, I mean, these speeches tend to be a little light on policy detail. There's usually a few nuggets. And I would say in this speech, the nuggets, the kind of concrete specific takeaways were, as you mentioned, he said they're going to put $7 million towards a kind of post-overdose facility. My sense is that's going to be with DESC, but I don't really know what else will go into that or exactly what that is. I suppose it's just kind of support for people who have just overdosed and kind of more effort to connect them with resources, that sort of thing.
Sure.
He also said that in the coming weeks, he will unveil his proposal for the comprehensive plan update. That's, I don't know if I'd call that news exactly because it's already late, but it is noteworthy that we have a timeline put on it at this point. And then he also said, you know, in a few weeks, we could expect some proposals on the transportation levy. Similarly,
right. Something
that maybe we would have expected to see already, but, you know, now we have a timeline. And then I would say also, you know, I don't know if this is news exactly, but he was the clearest I think he's been that when it comes to closing the budget gap, he does not foresee or support any kind of new taxes. You know, if you had been really kind of listening or paying attention, especially with the new council, I don't think that's a surprise. I would have been more surprised if he pushed for some new tax, but it was the clearest he has put it yet that he is actually opposed to that approach.
Right, and I guess I wanted to go down that path with you next in terms of what he did not say, which was he did not say that he was into this idea of gathering new revenue of any sort. And the quote that you lifted that I thought was a great one was this: passing a new or expanded tax will not address the fundamental issues needed to close this gap in the long run. We've been talking about this gap for a while here on the podcast for several months, somewhere in between $200 million and $230 million. And to me, it just kind of appears the mayor is kind of closing off some doors here, not only saying no to new sources of revenue, but maybe also saying no to the idea of expanding any taxes like the Jumpstart payroll tax, which was one idea floated around last year. What do you make of what he said there specific to that issue of raising taxes or not raising taxes, I guess, in this case?
Yeah, I mean, it tells me that, again, I don't know that that was ever really on the table, especially with this last election. It was fairly clear that these members ran, they never totally shut the door on exploring some kind of new revenue source, but they always framed it as the very last resort, which I think was
Right.
teeing up cuts over new taxes. And so when this sort of city council people won, I think that was pretty well taken off the table. So yeah, I mean, as far as his comments about sort of fundamental issues, I think that's a reference to there were a lot of programs, especially with a lot of COVID funds, that were funded on sort of one-time basis, and now that COVID federal money is gone, some questions about sustaining that. The real question for me around this is around the jumpstart tax, which is, they've used it to plug some budget gaps in the past at about $85 million. But I think there is some discussion and temptation, at least in this city hall, to basically take that entire sum, which just so happens to almost exactly equal the budget deficit, and paste it onto that budget gap, and kind of presto, we've solved the problem. I don't know. I think that's certainly on the table. I don't know if they'll go that direction, though.
Right. That would certainly soften the blow potentially in terms of some of these different cuts they've been considering. So, yeah, I'm not completely sure on that either, but I thought it was as you say, it's a very high level type of speech that mayors put out when they put out these State of the City addresses here. Any other observations from it, David? It felt like, again, a lot of aspirational things were said here, but any other things jump out at you from the State of the City address?
Yeah, I mean, I think as we've talked about before, there was some acknowledgement that there are high expectations on this city hall. That they ran. It's the most unified city hall as far as philosophy as that I can remember, and that on the one hand is good for the people who won, but it does mean that there's nowhere to hide on these problems, that they have ran on being change agents, and then they all won, and they have all the power in the world at City Hall, and so I think there was a line there. I don't have it in front of me, but Mayor Harrell sort of acknowledged that those expectations were there in his kind of Harrell fashion. Said we embrace those. It's sort of raw, sportsy, but it's true that this is a different city council and a different city hall, and there's no kind of progressive boogeyman anymore. I mean, this is who we have here.
Yeah, we don't run away from high expectations. In fact, we draw energy from them. So thank you, David.
Yeah, there you
go. Good poll there, and I wanted to make sure that we gave some highlights to that. But I did want to talk about, I guess, kind of this power shift within City Hall, and talk about this piece that you wrote about Council President Sarah Nelson moving from a role of outsider last year on the losing end of a lot of different votes to someone who's very much in charge as the leader of the council. The point that interested me the most about your piece was that she didn't really have a good relationship or any relationship with her colleagues on the council over the past few years. It seemed like they worked around her rather than with her. Is that the right way to describe how she was talking to you about this?
Yeah, I think so. And some of it does have to do with that they were so remote, and so there wasn't a lot of person-to-person interaction. But it was a city council that had clear ideas of what it wanted to do, and on a lot of occasions, as I think I pointed out, that was against what Sarah Nelson wanted to do. And so, they just didn't need her vote. And so they would work around her. And, I think that's true among the members there, and also true among the kind of outside advocates who were pushing for change. That, they wouldn't even really bother to take meetings with her because she wasn't a key vote. They only needed 5, and they easily had 5 at a lot of the times. What's just sort of interesting about this shift to me is to go from that status of somebody that is fairly easily worked around to running the place, essentially, is kind of a whiplash, and for me kind of symbolizes the change that has come to City Hall.
And I wanted to press a little further on that and just talk about what type of leader you think she is going to be here. I thought it was actually a little chilling when John Scholes of the Downtown Seattle Association told you Sarah Nelson wasn't afraid to lose on some votes in the past as a way to build up to a win as the new council president. And then he said she's not there to be liked. What did you draw from that? What kind of leader do you see her shaping up to be? I just wanted to draw attention to that comment and see what that means in terms of her future there and how she's going to lead.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think it's kind of what he said, which is over the last 2 years, she has taken some votes that were pretty unpopular among her colleagues and among people in City Hall.
We have landlords, a few different rent issues. Yeah, a few things.
Yeah, we have seen members. I can think of quite a few people who have changed their votes at the last minute because they felt the pressure to do so, or there is a certain amount of pressure in City Hall to go a certain way, and love her or hate her, Sarah Nelson was pretty consistent in her votes and on the losing end of a lot, and would say things publicly, kind of casting aspersions and accusing some of the kind of labor influence in City Hall as basically underwriting legislation. So she, for a couple of years, was really not that well liked because she said some fairly unpopular things among her colleagues and said it frequently and voted against what they wanted to get done. And so I think Skoll's point is basically that was hard, and she got a lot of criticism for that at the time, but she was doing it in service of where she is today, and look where it's gotten her. That after a couple years of some kind of unpopular votes, she kind of basically waited out her colleagues, and again, this isn't a qualitative statement about whether it's good or bad, but she was vindicated to an extent because now she's the president of the very body that she was an outcast of just about a month or two ago.
Yeah, such an interesting dynamic there. I'm really looking forward to seeing how she turns into as a leader, and we shall see as the committees really just get started up here in the month of February. So a lot more ahead with that. David, thank you for that. Well, up next, folks, I did want to talk about the spotlight we are continuing to shine on what's happening in our state capitol. A new budget proposal rolling out this week, and specifically a new transportation budget and how it might impact you and how you vote. Details on Now Hear This. Lawmakers in Olympia rolling out their budget this week, about $71 billion total in the supplemental operating budget, with about $1.9 billion in new spending. Not a lot of changes generally happen in these supplemental budgets, but I did want to make sure I pointed that out. There are no new taxes in either proposal from the House or Senate, but a lot of that funding is tied to money that comes in from the Climate Commitment Act through the cap and trade system we've talked about on the podcast. And we've also talked about how the CCA is under fire by an initiative, I-2117, that could eliminate it completely. So if it's eliminated, that could blow a hole in a lot of programs, especially transportation, where lawmakers have added $261 million, all dollars from the Climate Commitment Act. That would go towards our lagging state ferry system and getting 5 new hybrid electric vessels online. Here's what Senate Majority Leader Andy Billig said about the CCA and what happens to transportation if it's taken away.
So what's going to happen is we're going to have to reprioritize everything in transportation, and that's why basically, everything in the transportation budget, which is already a budget under a lot of duress, will be in question if the Climate Commitment Act fails.
David, I wanted to talk to you about this for a few reasons, including your background as a transportation reporter and your life as a ferry commuter. What do you make of what the state is presenting here, tying this investment in ferries directly to the Climate Commitment Act? It seems like some pretty big-time political gambling to me, but I wanted to get your take on this.
Yeah, I mean, certainly if the Climate Commitment Act is repealed, it's going to cause some scrambling for a system that's already stumbling all the time. It doesn't surprise me. I think the ferries have been among the biggest headaches facing the state and Governor Inslee. And there's a tie-in here, which is part of what they're trying to do is electrify the ferry system. Transportation revenue generally is a little, the future of transportation revenue is a little shaky, but meanwhile, the Climate Commitment Act has brought in like oodles of money, more than they projected. And so the math kind of makes some sense. And if you can tie it to the electrification of the ferries, you can sort of, you found a way into fixing an essential problem facing the state, which is the state of the ferry fleet, while also kind of having a justification for leaning on these dollars intended to fight climate change.
Right. And I guess just that connection there between something that Washington voters will be voting on this fall. I mean, it really ties together the Climate Commitment Act with, I guess, a lot of ferry riders out there who want to make sure that their system has boats in the future. Do you have a thought about that piece of it?
Yeah, I don't. That's a good point. I don't know if there's sort of a specific political aim here.
The state Republicans would say so, but yeah, keep going.
Yes, and that makes sense. It could very well could. I just haven't done any reporting on that to say whether or not that's true. But I will say that I expected the state legislature to use the Climate Commitment Act to fund ferries even before this initiative was on the ballot. I think it was a logical fit, and in a time when they're scrambling for money in a lot of different categories, and we can talk about those other places. It doesn't surprise me at all that the Climate Commitment Act was going to come into play here. At the same time, you're right. I think one of the risks of something like the Climate Commitment Act is the benefits maybe aren't immediately obvious to voters all the time, and slow. I mean, that is the challenge in transportation generally, is you fund something in 2024 and then you don't see the benefits until 2034 or whatever it might be. Right. But you're right. Here's an example where they can say, hey, look, we are fixing our ferry system with these dollars. If you vote to repeal these dollars, that goes away and our ferry system is in worse luck. Right. I think that resonates great with Puget Sound area residents. I think people on the east side of the mountains who are going to also be voting on this probably don't care at all. Right. I think there's probably some acknowledgement that there is a bit of a political play here, and also I think this was likely to be the plan even before there was an initiative on the ballot.
That's fair. That's fair. I wanted to make sure I pointed out we are also hearing that the legislature will hold hearings on 3 non-budget related initiatives presented by Let's Go Washington. Remember, there are 6 of them that they have presented to voters for this fall. So the parental rights on sex education measure, the police pursuit proposal, the state income tax initiative. They're going to hold hearings on those, the legislature will, but these initiatives covering the Climate Commitment Act, the Washington Cares long-term care measure, the capital gains tax, they're going to allow those to go to the ballot. I think there had to be some sort of response to these from the state legislature here. What do you make of how they've kind of split those up, David?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know exactly what their calculations are. I think they figure maybe those are the issues that if they make a change to a proposed initiative at the state level, that also then goes to the ballot. Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's some kind of questions around where that line is about how much it has to relate specifically to the initiative before it goes to the ballot. But, I suppose those are the issues where the legislators who do not want these initiatives to pass figure, maybe it makes sense for us to put our own proposal next to it and sort of set up the fight in that way.
I know that was an issue a couple years ago when that sex ed measure was in front of voters. So we'll see what the legislature does this time around. I just thought it was very interesting to see this as we await a flurry of activity over the next couple of weeks here. We're not too far away from this session wrapping up, so watch for some more budget activity over this weekend, especially when it comes to transportation. And then the long days are ahead for the state legislature coming up next week as they really start hashing out some of these issues and the bills that they have presented. Are they going to live? Are they going to die? We're going to come back to those and make sure we keep you updated on what's going on there. But I really wanted to make sure I kept people updated, David, on something happening in the city of Seattle specifically, a closer look with you at the state of our homelessness crisis. So Deputy Mayor Tiffany Washington led a press conference late last week talking about how the city has reduced the amount of tents occupying public spaces down from 1,000 2 years ago when Mayor Harrell took office to 523 currently. With RVs, that was more than 300, she said, when Harrell took office. Now it's down to 227. What do you make of these announcements other than a very early attempt to boost a re-election campaign for Bruce Harrell in 2025?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to measure these things. And there's a lot of, the biggest problem, not the biggest problem at all. One challenge of measuring progress is, the lies, damn lies, and statistics. It's difficult to know exactly how these are being measured. The timing is convenient. It comes right before the city hall and this mayor and the city council is likely to kind of second guess its relationship with the King County Regional Homelessness Authority. Mm-hmm. I would say it's early. I'm not sure I'm putting a ton of stock into pronouncements of progress just yet. But we'll see.
Yeah. I guess I wanted to touch a little bit further on that relationship with the King County Regional Homelessness Authority, because I think I have definitely heard different council members call that into question. Certainly I've heard the mayor call that into question. This idea that Seattle is spending more than $165 million on homelessness, that's the stat. But of that amount, about $109 million is going to the KCRHA. And here we are talking about budgets coming up for the city of Seattle over this next year, et cetera. I guess I would like to understand your thoughts about that, where the city of Seattle can go, where it should go when it comes to the KCRHA, which is bringing a new interim director, et cetera. I know we've touched on this in the past, but where do you see that relationship going, especially when it comes to how the city funds the KCRHA?
For me, the sort of most obvious effect of this much more kind of politically aligned city council is, I think there's going to be a lot of second guessing about that relationship. The agreement between the city and the body is up for renewal, I guess, next year. I think it's early to say that this city hall will sever that relationship or let the body die exactly. But if it is to continue on, I think what we're seeing now is a fairly serious push for Seattle honestly, Mayor Bruce Harrell, to have a much more guiding hand, I guess is the gentle way to put it, in how that body is run. I mean, the new interim CEO kind of comes directly on the recommendation of Mayor Harrell. The two of them played football together at Garfield High School decades. There's tons of photos of them together. I mean, they're good, long friends.
Yes.
We know that a consultant that also does some work for Harrell was kind of involved in that process of cease and helping install him there. And so I think one of two things happen, in the more likely, I think there's pieces of what the city has given to King County Regional Homelessness Authority that the city tries to bring back. I wouldn't be surprised if things around like outreach, and how to deal with homeless encampments, I would think the city maybe tries to kind of claw back to an extent. The city clearly favors more immediate emergency transitional housing, like tiny homes. Whether or not the city has to claw back money to do that, or if this new interim CEO becomes more supportive of that approach, I don't know. But at the end of the day, I think this city hall is going to be fighting for a much stronger arm in kind of dictating the direction of the regional homelessness response, whether that is from within inside the regional homelessness authority or they pull out and just do it on their own. I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to it, David. It's not just the funding from the city that goes into the regional homelessness authority. I think it's also the structure of the RHA. 3 different boards were in the process, or still are in the process, of overseeing the RHA. I've heard from a few different members. I remember hearing this from Andrew Lewis while he was still in office last year. Let's reduce that to one board so we can have at least one group that we're dealing with, rather than these different entities within the RHA that they have to wrestle with. So I think it's a funding issue. I think it's an issue when it comes to leadership of the group and how boards are involved with the RHA. And I'm with you. I'm very interested to see how this relationship between this new interim CEO of the RHA, Darryl Powell, and Mayor Harrell come together here, because that's going to be one to watch here in the months upcoming. All right, well, coming up here, we are talking about some school bond measures. You better believe it. A number of them passing, but many others not getting the supermajority they need to succeed. What's happening with these votes? Do the goalposts need to be changed on school bonds? More on that story coming up on What's Next. And a quick heads up here, listeners. We are getting some great input for our segment, You Ask, We Answer. Any question you might have about local government, we still need your emails. Send them in to Seattle News, Views, and Brews. Spell it out there at gmail.com. We will be answering one of these questions coming up next week. We're getting a few in. We could always use more. Thank you very much for sending those. But David, I did want to talk about these school bonds. As reported in Crosscut, only 7 of 21 school bonds statewide got the supermajority votes they needed to pass, but 91% of school operations levies, which require only a simple majority, passed. And I thought about this when you tweeted that your youngster's possible future school district didn't pass its school bond. Is it time to reconsider getting rid of that supermajority rule for school bonds? Or what do you think about this?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not an education reporter, so I don't have a ton of sort of context on the origins of that. I'll sort of zoom out even further, which is the sort of broader conversation about how schools are funded and built. I think this was a piece that, as far as I understand, was not part of the McCleary, but has come up a bunch, which is it even constitutional that rich areas like say Bainbridge Island, for example, where I grew up, fairly affluent area passes its levies basically every time with something like 75% of the vote, therefore has these college campuses that people go to for high school or even elementary school. Meanwhile, in South Kitsap, Port Orchard, that area, they haven't passed a bond in 35 years. And so therefore have, these kind of crumbling schools. And I think there are real questions just about the fairness of that, which is you've built a system where you kind of have haves and have-nots. And I know that there are conversations around, finding that unconstitutional and finding a way to kind of spread peanut butter around the money a little bit better in a way. So I don't know about the 60% threshold. Clearly it's getting to the point where it's blocking some funds, but I do think that there's just kind of a larger issue around that basic system of having individual districts decide how much money they want to give their school. And, it just creates a system where areas with more money are going to have better schools than areas with less money.
Yeah, I remember in the fallout from the McCleary decision a few years ago, that was the big idea that lawmakers had said, this is looking like a solution here with the funding mechanism that they proposed. And I believe the idea of McCleary was that this basic education piece was paid for and was the same around the state. But I think you're right. When you start adding in these different pieces about what these bonds actually pay for, that's where the devil's in the details there, because if they're actually paying for things like salaries for teachers and things of that nature, that's where we see that discrepancy. And I hate to say it, that McCleary fix that a lot of us were reporting on a couple of years ago didn't really seem like much of a fix to me. But this is a very important issue. I think this is something lawmakers have talked about for a while. I will say that these measures that have been passing, these school operations levies, well, it was the deal that for a long time, those were super majorities too. But in 2007, lawmakers and voters actually changed the Constitution to remove that supermajority requirement for all the school levies. It's made them easier to pass ever since then. So again, one of those education stories. I'm not an education reporter either, David, but I always find it's interesting to look at these things and see how they affect the everyday taxpayer too. All right, we do need to wrap up here, David. I just wanted to, commiserate with you about a sad state of affairs at City Hall. I saw you post on this. That one spot where you could actually charge your phone on the first floor, that one outlet that's there, the chair is gone. Now, what are you supposed to do? Talk to me about this. This is a crisis of phone charging. What do you got?
Yeah, there are like 3 outlets in the whole place. One is by the coffee cart, so you can sit at one of those tables, but then there's a lot of noise and you run into a million people. The other is way off in the corner on a cold bench. And then there was this one nice one where you had a leather chair you could sit in, and they got rid of that chair. The conspiracy theorist in me, and I don't know this is actually a stretch, is they were trying to discourage people from coming in there and camping and charging their phones. And making it harder to do that. I would like to see it reinstalled, because that was kind of my office away from my office, was that particular corner, so I could plug in and sit comfortably.
Yeah, David, I'm going to see what I can do on that. This aggression will not stand, man. We need to get that chair back for you. I tell you.
I'm just going to pick up a chair from somewhere else and put it there next time.
That's right. Got to do what you got to do. Well, David, thank you for helping me out once again. Thanks to everybody listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. Thanks especially to our patrons who support the show. Please get in touch with us and send us some questions at Seattle News, Views, and Brews at gmail.com. This podcast is on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you listen, we are there. Please find Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon too. Show your support. Thanks for watching on Converge Media as well. We will see you next time.
Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2024.